There is a prison so terrifying that inmates beg to be sent to Siberia instead, a place where the guards don't just lock you in, they break you down, piece by piece, until the man you used to be simply ceases to exist. It sits in the remote Russian city of Solovletsk, near the Kazakhstan border. Its official name is Federal Penal Colony No. 6, but the men inside and the men who run it call it something else. Black Dolphin. And once you enter those gates, you don't leave. Not in years. Not in decades. Some never leave at all. This is the story of Dmitri Volkov, a man sentenced to life inside Russia's most feared maximum security prison. A man who witnessed things that cannot be unsaid. A man who somehow survived, but survival in Black Dolphin comes at a cost most people can't even imagine. If you're new here, subscribe right now. We go deep on the stories most channels won't touch. Hit that bell. You're going to want every part of this. The day Dmitri Volkov arrived at Black Dolphin, he was blindfolded. Not metaphorically. Literally blindfolded, a black cloth tied tight around his eyes, hands cuffed behind his back. That is standard procedure at Black Dolphin. No incoming prisoner is permitted to see the layout of the facility. Not the corridors. Not the guard stations. Not the exits. Because there are no exits. When the blindfold came off, Dmitri saw gray. Floor gray. Wall gray. Ceiling gray. The entire world had been drained of color. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed with a sound like a dying insect, constant, irritating, inescapable. Guards in military-grade uniforms flanked him on both sides. Their faces were blank, professional. They did not speak to him as a person. They spoke at him as a number. Inmate 4471. That was Dmitri now. They walked him bent at the waist, hat forced down, hands clasped behind his back through corridor after corridor. This posture, he would later learn, was not optional. Every prisoner in Black Dolphin must walk this way at all times. Head down, eyes to the floor. Never standing straight. It was the first lesson Black Dolphin teaches every man who enters. You are not a man anymore. Within hours of arrival, Dmitri was handed a list of rules. Not suggestions. Not guidelines. Rules. At Black Dolphin, there are rules for everything. Rules for how to walk bent, eyes down, never upright. Rules for how to sleep on your back, hands above the blanket, face visible to the guard who checks every 15 minutes through the door slot. Rules for how to sit, how to eat, how to exist inside these walls. Breaking a rule means punishment. Breaking a rule twice means solitary. And at Black Dolphin, solitary is not a room. It is a coffin with a light bulb. Dmitri stood in the intake room and listened to a guard recite the regulations in a flat, mechanical voice. The same voice, Dmitri imagined, that man had used 10,000 times before. Not angry, not cruel, just empty. As if these rules were so normal, so obviously correct, that they required no emotion to deliver. No communication between cells. No raising your voice. No contact with other prisoners during movement. No letters without approval. No phone calls for the first 6 months. No news from the outside world. No reminders that the outside world still existed. Dmitri held the paper in his hands. His fingers were trembling. He told himself it was the cold. It wasn't the cold. Cell 12 was approximately 9 square meters. That's roughly the size of a large bathroom. Except it had no bathtub, no mirror, no warmth. Just a bed bolted to the wall, a steel toilet, a small fold-down table, and a shelf so narrow it could hold 3 books if the prisoner was allowed books, which required approval. The window was frosted. Not cracked or frosted with age, deliberately frosted. Opaque. You could tell if it was day or night by how the light changed. Nothing more. The light in the cell was never fully turned off. At night, it dimmed, but it never went out. Black Dolphin operates under a policy of constant visibility. The guards must be able to see each prisoner at all times. So the light burns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year after year. Sleep researchers have documented what constant artificial light does to the human mind over time. It disrupts circadian rhythms. It causes anxiety. It erodes the boundary between day and night until the prisoner loses track of time entirely. Dmitri lay on his mattress that first night. If it was night, staring at the dim glow above him, he had been sentenced to life. Life in this room. 9 square meters. Forever. The guards at Black Dolphin are not ordinary prison guards. They are trained rigorously. systematically to maintain absolute psychological dominance over every inmate at all times. They rotate shifts constantly so that prisoners can never build familiarity with any one guard. No relationships, no softness, no human connection across those bars. When a guard opens a cell door, 2 armed officers position themselves outside. When a prisoner moves through the facility, 2 guards walk beside him and 1 walks ahead, shouting warnings down the corridor so no other prisoner accidentally enters the same hallway. In the entire history of Black Dolphin, there has never been a successful escape. Not one. The guards know this. The prisoners know this. And it changes something fundamental about the psychology of both. For the guards, it breeds a quiet, absolute authority. For the prisoners, it breeds something darker, the creeping, cellular understanding that this place is the end. There is no plan. There is no tunnel to dig. There is no moment of weakness to exploit. Dmitri watched the slot in his door open and close. Open and close. The eye on the other side never blinked. At 5:00 a.m., the lights in cell 12 came fully on. Not gradually. All at once. Searing fluorescent white flooding every corner of the room, burning through Dmitri's closed eyelids. He had been half asleep, the kind of shallow, fractured sleep that the constant light and every 15-minute checks allowed, and the sudden brightness jolted him upright. A slot in the door opened. A tray slid through. Breakfast at Black Dolphin is not designed for enjoyment. It is designed for sustenance, just enough calories to keep a body functioning. On the tray, a gray porridge, a piece of black bread, and a cup of weak tea. Dmitri stared at it. 6 months ago, he had been a free man eating at a kitchen table. He had complained about bad coffee. He picked up the spoon. At Black Dolphin, mealtimes are silent. No talking. No interaction. You eat what is given, in the time given, and you slide the tray back through the slot. Then you sit, and you wait for the next scheduled activity. There are 7 scheduled activities in a Black Dolphin day. Each one exists not to stimulate the prisoner, but to structure his captivity so precisely that he has no mental space left to plot, to plan, or to hope. Dmitri ate his porridge. It tasted like concrete. Dmitri rarely saw the other inmates. That was the point. Black Dolphin does not house ordinary criminals. It houses Russia's most dangerous convicted killers, serial murderers, terrorists. Men who committed acts so violent that the Russian justice system placed them beyond the reach of any lesser facility. The man in cell 11, whose name Dmitri learned only months later through whispered words passed during rare outdoor breaks, had murdered 11 people. The man in cell 13 had carried out a bombing that killed 32. 2 cells down, someone had been involved in a hostage crisis that Russian newspapers had covered for weeks. These were not men who made poor choices under pressure. These were men who had looked into the eyes of other human beings and felt nothing, and Dmitri was among them. What was strange, what unsettled him deeply during those first weeks, was how quiet it was. He had imagined prison as loud, violent, chaotic. Movies had taught him that. The reality of Black Dolphin was the opposite. It was silent, not peaceful silent, not the silence of a library or a forest, the silence of a place where men have stopped expecting anything, where rage has long since burned itself out, leaving only a gray, hollow entrance. Dmitri heard it through the walls at night. The silence of men who had given up. He swore to himself he never would. Once a day, Dmitri was taken for his walk. This is what the guards called it, the walk. It was not a walk in any sense that a person on the outside would recognize. It was a slow circuit around a small concrete yard approximately the size of a tennis court enclosed entirely by walls and wire. Dmitri walked bent at the waist, hat down, hands clasped behind his back. Guard on his left, guard on his right. No contact with any other prisoner. No sitting down. No stopping. 30 minutes. Every day. That was his sky. 30 minutes to look up briefly, carefully, at the narrow rectangle of sky visible above the walls and remember that the world beyond this concrete box still turned. That somewhere, right now, children were riding bicycles. Couples were arguing about nothing. People were eating meals they'd complain about. He used to count things during the walk. Cracks in the pavement, bricks in the wall. Anything to give his mind something to grip. 112 bricks on the east wall. 47 cracks in the courtyard floor. He knew those numbers the way some men know their children's birthdays. 3 months in, Dmitri made a mistake. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight or an escape attempt. He spoke without permission to the prisoner being escorted past his cell during a movement period. 2 words. He said 2 words through the bars as the man passed. The guards heard it. That evening, Dmitri was moved to the solitary confinement block. Solitary at Black Dolphin is a cell within a cell, the space so small that a grown man cannot fully extend his arms. There is no bed. There is a concrete ledge, covered with a thin rubber mat, that folds down from the wall at night and must be folded back up in the morning. There is a toilet. There is the light. There is nothing else. The silence in solitary is different from the silence in a regular cell. In a regular cell, you can occasionally hear the distant sounds of the facility, boots in the corridor, the clang of a distant gate, the murmur of a guard's radio. Those sounds, irritating as they are, confirm that a world exists outside the door. In solitary, there is nothing. Dmitri spent 14 days there. By day 3, he had started talking to himself, not because he was losing his mind, he insisted to himself, but because the sound of a human voice, even his own, was the only proof he had that he still existed. Every prisoner at Black Dolphin is evaluated by a psychiatrist, not out of compassion, out of security. The facility's administration understands that a mentally unstable prisoner is an unpredictable one. So the psychological evaluations are regular, clinical, and thorough. And they are, in a dark way, among the most honest conversations an inmate will have. Dmitri sat across from the psychiatrist, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a pen that never stopped moving. The end answered her questions in a flat voice. Are you sleeping? Barely. Are you eating? Yes. Are you experiencing any violent ideation? No. Are you experiencing despair? Dmitri paused. Then, no. She looked at him over her clipboard. She had heard that pause 1,000 times. What the psychiatrist's reports consistently showed across Black Dolphin's inmate population was a pattern of psychological deterioration that follows a predictable arc. First, anger. Then, bargaining, an endless mental rehearsal of appeals that will never be granted. Then, a deep, concrete depression. And finally, in the men who stabilized, something strange, acceptance, not peace, not contentment, just the cessation of resistance. Dmitri read about this arc in a book he was eventually allowed. He recognized himself in every stage. He was currently somewhere between bargaining and depression. He was terrified of what came next. 6 months after his arrival, Dmitri was permitted to write a letter. One letter, reviewed by prison censors before sending. Any mention of conditions, guard names, security arrangements, or language deemed inflammatory would be redacted and blacked out with a thick marker. Before the letter reached its destination, he wrote to his sister. He spent 4 days drafting it in his head before he was given paper. He chose every word carefully, not to avoid censorship, but because he wanted her to know he was okay without burdening her with the truth that he was not. He told her the food was adequate. He told her he was reading. He told her he thought about her. He did not tell her about the light that never turned off. He did not tell her about solitary. He did not tell her that some nights, lying on his back with his hands visible above the blanket as required, he struggled to remember what her face looked like. 3 months later, a letter came back. The censors had redacted 2 lines from her response. Dmitri never found out what they said. He kept the letter under his mattress until it fell apart. During exercise periods, Dmitri eventually began to notice one man in particular. He was old, perhaps 65, perhaps older. His face was a map of decades spent inside these walls. He moved through his 30-minute walk with a deliberate and hurried calm that Dmitri found simultaneously unsettling and magnetic. This man, Dmitri learned through careful, whispered exchanges conducted over weeks, had been in Black Dolphin for 22 years. 22 years. He had arrived as a young man. He had watched other inmates break down, be transferred to psychiatric facilities, die of illness, die of despair. He had outlasted 3 prison directors and more guards than he could count. And he had developed, over those 2 decades, a philosophy of survival that he shared with Dmitri in fragments. 1 sentence here, 1 sentence there, across weeks of 30-minute walks. Stop counting days. Count only what is in front of you. Anger is energy you cannot afford to waste. They own your body. They do not own the inside of your skull. Guard it. Dmitri listened to these fragments like a man dying of thirst being handed drops of water. He turned them over in his mind during the endless hours in his cell. He didn't know if they would save him, but they were something to hold. We're halfway through Dmitri's story and it gets darker before it gets better. If you're watching without a subscription, now is the time. This channel goes places others won't. The first winter almost broke him. Black Dolphin sits near the Ural steppe, where temperatures in January plunge to -30 degrees Celsius. The prison's heating system is functional but not generous. Inside the cells, the cold settles into the concrete walls and radiates back out at night, a deep, structural cold that blankets and thin mattresses cannot fully combat. During the outdoor walk is still mandatory. Even in winter, the wind came in across flat, treeless land with nothing to slow it down. Dmitri's face ached within minutes. His fingers, clasped behind his back, went numb. The guards, bundled in heavy coats, seemed indifferent. Cold, Dmitri discovered, does something to the human mind that even isolation doesn't fully replicate. Isolation is a deprivation of connection. Cold is a physical assault, the body screaming for warmth, for comfort, for relief that does not come. He began to understand why so many prisoners in facilities like this one deteriorate faster in winter. Not because of the temperature alone, but because the cold strips away the last thin layer of dignity, reduces a man, regardless of who he was, to something animal and desperate. He curled on his mattress and waited for spring. Violence at Black Dolphin is rare. And that is not a compliment to the institution. It is rare because the system is designed to prevent it, not through rehabilitation or peace, but through absolute control. Prisoners have virtually no unsupervised contact with each other. Movement is choreographed. Interaction is eliminated. There is almost no opportunity for violence because there is almost no opportunity for anything. But it happens. 3 months into Dmitri's second year, a prisoner 2 blocks over attacked a guard during a cell inspection. The details traveled through the facility in the way all information traveled at Black Dolphin, slowly, in pieces. Through whispered words and careful inference, what Dmitri heard, the prisoner had been in Black Dolphin for 14 years. He had been denied a letter from his daughter for the 3rd consecutive time. Something in him had finally, irrevocably snapped. The outcome was swift and absolute. The prisoner was placed in solitary confinement indefinitely. His privileges, such as they were stripped entirely. He would not see natural light again for a year. Dmitri heard about this and felt 2 things simultaneously: horror at what the man had endured, and a cold, clear recognition. He could not afford to snap. He had to find another way. In his second year, Dmitri began building a house, not a real house. A house inside his mind. It started as a coping mechanism, something he had read about in a psychology book he was eventually permitted. He began designing an imaginary house in complete detail, decided on the layout, the number of rooms, the view from each window. He spent hours or entire days on specific details: the grain of the wooden floor in the hallway, the color of the kitchen tiles, the weight of the front door handle. He furnished it room by room. He planted a garden. He chose books for the shelves. When the cell became unbearable, when the fluorescent light felt like it was drilling into his skull, when the silence pressed down like physical weight, he went to the house instead. He walked through it room by room slowly, recalling every detail he had placed there. It sounds like madness. It was, in a clinical sense, a dissociative coping mechanism, but it worked. Months later, a prison psychiatrist would note in Dmitri's fall that he displayed unusual psychological resilience for a lifer. She attributed it to stubbornness. She wasn't entirely wrong. Time in Black Dolphin does not pass the way time passes in the outside world. On the outside, time is marked by events of birthdays, seasons changing, news cycles, the small daily variations that accumulate into the feeling of a life moving forward. Inside Black Dolphin, time is marked by almost nothing. The same wake-up, the same tray through the slot, the same walk, the same count, the same lights dimming but never going out. Dmitri's hair began to gray in his 3rd year. He discovered this not from a mirror. Mirrors are not permitted in cells, but from a strand that fell onto his tray during breakfast. He held it between his fingers for a long time. He was 34 years old. He had been told, when sentenced, that he would die inside these walls. Russia does not release lifers from Black Dolphin. That is not how it works. You come here, you serve your time, Your time ends when your body ends. Dmitri put the gray strand down. He ate his breakfast. He went to his imaginary house and sat in the kitchen for a while. In his 4th year, Dmitri's court-appointed attorney filed an appeal. This is not uncommon among Black Dolphin inmates. Appeals are filed, reviewed by courts that almost never overturn life sentences, and quietly rejected. The system is not designed to release these men. It is designed to process their appeals with just enough procedural weight that no one can claim they weren't heard. Dmitri received the rejection 6 months after the appeal was filed. It came as a single typed page slid through his door slot. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he set it on his shelf next to the worn photograph of his sister. What struck him was not the rejection itself. He had expected it. What struck him was the language. The decision was written in the clean, detached prose of institutional bureaucracy. Words like considered and reviewed and determined. As if somewhere, in a warm office, a human being with lunch on his desk had genuinely considered Dmitri's case. He knew the appeal had been a formality. His attorney had known it was a formality. Everyone in the system knew it, but they filed it anyway. Because the appearance of justice is almost as important to the system as justice itself. Almost. A priest visited Black Dolphin twice a year. This was permitted under Russian prison regulations, religious access for inmates who requested it. Dmitri had not been a religious man before his conviction. He had been indifferent to God in the way many people are, not hostile, just uninvested. But in his 5th year, he put his name on the list for the priest's visit, not because he believed, because he wanted to talk to someone who had chosen to be there. Everyone else in Black Dolphin, guards, medical staff, psychiatrists, was there because it was a job. The priest came because he wanted to. Dmitri found that extraordinary. He found it almost incomprehensible. They talked for 40 minutes. About guilt. About whether suffering had meaning. About whether a man who had done terrible things could still be a man worth something. The priest didn't offer easy answers. Dmitri respected that. Afterward, he didn't pray. He wasn't there yet, and maybe he never would be. But he thought about what the priest said for weeks. Survival is not the same as living, but it is the beginning of it. In his 6th year, Dmitri came closer to breaking than he ever admitted to anyone. It wasn't one thing. It was an accumulation, a weight that had been building, layer by layer, since the day he arrived. The light, the routine, the silence, the letters that came less frequently as the years passed, and people on the outside slowly, naturally, began to move on. The appeals that went nowhere. The gray walls that had become so familiar they had stopped registering as a surface and had become simply the atmosphere of his existence. One morning, he didn't get up when the lights came on. This sounds trivial. At Black Dolphin, it is not. Getting up immediately when the lights come on is expected. Deviation is noted. Guards are trained to recognize the specific way a prisoner lies still as depression rather than sleep. A guard spoke through the slot. Dmitri didn't answer. The door opened. 2 guards entered. They spoke to him in the flat, professional tone that Black Dolphin guards use for everything, firm, not unkind, deeply impersonal. Get up. You must get up. He got up. Not because he wanted to. Not because he felt hope. Because the old prisoner's words, the one who had been there 22 years, surfaced in his mind and bidden. They do not own the inside of your skull. Guard it. He got up. He ate his breakfast. He went to the imaginary house. In his 7th year, Dmitri was granted access to a chess set. This requires explanation. At Black Dolphin, privileges are not given, they are earned through sustained compliance. Years of following every rule, every posture requirement, every silence protocol, can eventually result in small additions to a prisoner's cell. A second book, a chess set, permission to write an extra letter per month. These things are objectively minor. In the context of Black Dolphin, they are monumental. Dmitri could not play against anyone that would require unsupervised contact. He played against himself. Set up the pieces, played one side, then the other, the game unfolding over hours or days. It sounds lonely. It was lonely, but it was also something else, the problem to solve. A system with rules that were fair, that rewarded careful thinking, that had no arbitrary power imbalances. A tiny world inside the gray world where the outcome depended entirely on how well he thought. He played hundreds of games. He lost as often as he won. He didn't care. He was thinking again. Over years, a strange community formed in the silence of Black Dolphin, not a community of conversation, that was too risky, too regulated, a community of recognition, of small, barely perceptible acknowledgments exchanged during outdoor walks. A glance held a half-second longer than chance would explain. A slight tilt of the head. The micro-language of men who could not speak but still needed to know they were seen. Dmitri learned to read this language fluently. He knew who was struggling by the way they walked, not just bent as required, but collapsed inward, as if gravity had gotten heavier. He knew who had received bad news by the particular quality of their silence the following morning. He knew who had reached the acceptance phase the old man had described. Because something left their posture, not the compliance posture, but the tension beneath it. They never spoke about any of this. They didn't need to. Human beings are extraordinarily good at communicating without words when words are taken from them. It is one of the things that makes us hard to fully break even in a place designed specifically for that purpose. Dmitri looked forward to those 30-minute walks in a way he could never have predicted. They were, in their strange way, the most human part of his day. What Black Dolphin takes from a man is not just freedom. It takes his relationships in slow motion. Not all at once, that would be too clean, too definitive. It takes them gradually, the way water erodes stone. A letter that comes every week becomes every month, then every few months, then stops entirely, not because the people outside stop caring, but because maintaining a relationship with a man who will never come home is an act of grief that most people eventually cannot sustain. Dmitri's sister wrote for 6 years. Then her letters became shorter. Then they came less often. He didn't blame her. She had her own life, a husband, children, a world that demanded her presence in it. In his 8th year, he received his last letter from her. He didn't know it was the last one when he read it. He read it expecting another would come. For months afterward, he still hoped. Eventually, he stopped hoping. He kept her photograph on the shelf. He still visited the kitchen in his imaginary house, the kitchen he'd designed thinking of her. This is what doesn't make it into the statistics about Black Dolphin. The slow disappearance of everyone who ever loved you, not through death, but through the simple, terrible mathematics of time and distance. 10 years inside Black Dolphin. Dmitri knew the date because the guards told him, a procedural note, recorded in his file, marking the decade milestone. There was no ceremony. No acknowledgement beyond the administrative, just the information, delivered through a slot in a door, that he had now spent 10 years inside these walls. He was 43 years old. In those 10 years, Russia had changed 3 heads of government. A global pandemic had swept the world and receded. Technologies had been invented that he couldn't fully imagine. Wars had started and some had ended. Entire generations of children had been born, gone to school, grown into adolescence, knowing nothing of a world without smartphones. Dmitri knew none of this in real time. He pieced it together in fragments from letters when they came, from the priest who occasionally shared guarded references to world events, and from new inmates who arrived with recent memories of the outside world still fresh on them. He had learned to listen for those fragments, to hold them up like pieces of a window. The world continued. He continued. Both facts seemed to him approximately miraculous. Survival in Black Dolphin is not free. Dmitri understood this deeply by his 10th year. He had survived, functionally, psychologically intact in a way many around him were not. He had not broken. He had not begged. He had not lost the thread of himself that he'd held onto through imaginary houses and chess games and whispered wisdom from an old man who had become, in time, his only real teacher. But surviving Black Dolphin changes you in ways you don't choose and can't undo. You learn to need almost nothing. This is, on one level, a superpower. On another, it is a profound loss. Human beings are supposed to need things: a connection, warmth, variety, stimulation. The stripping of those needs doesn't elevate you. It diminishes you, quietly, in places you don't notice until much later. Dmitri found that he had lost the ability to be surprised by anything. Not fear, not wonder, not beauty, just the reflexive capacity for surprise that ordinary life generates 100 times a day. He had become very still, not peaceful, not broken. Just still, the way a forest is still after years of winter. Waiting for a spring it has stopped expecting, but has not stopped being ready for. This morning is like every other morning in Black Dolphin. The lights come fully on at 5 o'clock a.m. The slot opens. The tray slides through. Grey porridge. Black bread. Weak tea. Dmitri sits up. Receives the tray. Eats. He is a man the outside world has largely forgotten. He has been inside these walls for over a decade. He will, in all statistical likelihood, die inside them, not through violence, not through dramatic confrontation, but simply through the passage of time in a place that stretches time into something unrecognizable. And yet, he finishes his breakfast. He folds his blanket with the precision of long practice. He stands bent, as required, and waits for the guard's knock that signals the morning count. Inside his skull, in the place they do not own, he walks through the house. He checks the kitchen, the books on the shelves, the grain of the wooden floor in the hallway. Everything is exactly where he left it. This is what Black Dolphin could not take from him. In the end, not for lack of trying, but because there are rooms inside a human being that no institution can reach. Rooms built of memory and stubbornness and the refusal, quiet and absolute, to become only what a system decided you were. He is inmate 4471. He is also still Dmitri Volkov. Both things are true, and every morning he gets up. They both remain true, and that in Black Dolphin is everything. If this story hit different, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We drop new prison stories every week. Comment below, could you survive Black Dolphin? I'll be reading every single reply.